Uh, Good morning. I think it's almost midday now. We've come to the last session for this conference, which has really, I think, been very important in terms of the issues that have been highlighted. Now, this panel discussion dealing with the path ahead in terms of the energy mix, a very important subject, and I'd like to share this perhaps example with you of my own home country of South Africa, where every 5 years we develop a thing called the Integrated Energy Master Plan. And the subject of the energy mix has been with us, I would say, at least over the last 10 years. But my overall observation is that we've been perhaps not asking the appropriate questions when it comes to what do we mean by the energy mix and what is appropriate for each country or geographical spread. For example, South Africa its neighbors, none of them are energy intensive users. They don't have heavy industries. They're not producing energy themselves. The design of the grid in South Africa is more of a unitary grid. So, but the discussion has largely not been about the three pillars that I mentioned at the 7th World PetroCoal Congress that effectively for me it would appear that they are universal as far as the energy policy of a country is concerned. That is reliable supply at the least cost per kilowatt hour in an environmentally sustainable, friendly manner. And I said those are the three pillars that, in my view, should inform not only the policymakers, but even the industry leaders as they approach in that. That first and foremost, is energy available for many? Because energy poverty, it is effectively reached epidemic proportions that if you can have the sizes of the population, I would say in South Africa we have tried somewhat, but our neighboring countries, people do not have access to cleaner, cheaper electricity. And from a policymaker point of view, I don't believe that we can continue to pursue policies which you find that for an ordinary household in a remote area, they spend a great deal of their day really creating energy to be able just to have something to eat. But also that when they do so, they're using sources of energy which are not, you cannot apply them or use them in a manner whereby you have got a degree of control because there isn't even any investment. And I want to repeat the example that I even gave you last year, that of course in South Africa we still also have the challenges of high density areas. So we've got a rapidly urbanizing population and peri-urban, but as they do so, we find that the majority of people, for their heat that they need at home, they are resorting to even using bituminous coal. I would say, 15, 20 years ago, we used anthracitic coal, which had a lesser impact than what bituminous coal is having. So as a result now, under uncontrolled environment, we're finding that people do not have solar as much as the government, and this is really where I'm seeing the disjuncture. The government is spending billions and billions of dollars investing and subsidizing the solar energy industry, for example, but at the same time, the solar energy, it is not available nor appropriate for finding heat at home. So instead of people having perhaps maybe gas for heating, they are using bituminous coal, which unfortunately, regardless of class or income levels or education, everybody else now is subjected to polluted air. So I think these are some of the challenges that we need to take beyond perhaps the group of the converted here in terms of understanding that the energy mix has to be appropriate for a country. As I say, because we have a unitary grid system in South Africa with our neighboring countries that cannot sell us any power, you then find that technically when it comes to even your grid management, renewables have not, because of their intermittent nature of availability and supply, they have not been appropriate for a unitary grid that we have. But we have not spent enough time looking at microgrids, for example, whereby there's not as much intensity in terms of need, where we don't have heavy industries that cannot rely. Now, I'll give you an example. Just 2 weeks ago, we had over 1,000 people trapped underground a gold mine. And the depth of that gold mine is about 1,800 meters below surface. So those are some of the challenges we are grappling with, that to run a mine at that depth with the geothermal gradient being where it is not possible to rely on any of the intermittent sources of energy, because you're running a continuous operation 24/7. You have to cool the place at all material times. You have to make sure that, men and material are able to, go underground and be able to come up. So those are some of the challenges. And it showed, as I say, 2 weeks ago, why what we have been talking about in terms of increasing with the view of substitution of fossil fuel-based energy with renewables, one of the challenges and the near catastrophic events that we can have. Now, they didn't have power, they didn't have emergency generation capacity, which would have been from, diesel-powered generation, just to be able to keep the environment underground livable for those few hours. And here we could have ended up with a catastrophe, which thankfully was averted because power was restored, but it was fossil fuel power that was restored. So one of my observations, and I think it would be interesting in a forum like this to say, how do we take this to ensure that the very powerful lobby, which has been against fossil fuels, perhaps maybe things are put in context. Now, when we talk about the energy mix, I made a observation at before COP17, I think the one in France, in Paris, that, was it COP22? COP21, thank you very much. That at the very same time, there was research that came out. In fact, I think the professor who wrote that research is actually from India, but is at the university in Canada, that 50% of the world of environmental or climate change, 50% of climate change is not human activity induced, but rather it is by something outside of our own control. And he published this paper on the phenomenon of solar forcing, that it is the cause of 50% of the climate change. So in our considering of what is an appropriate and an effective and affordable energy mix for any country with the view of eradicating energy poverty, it would appear to me that one of the things that we need to be considering is we need to be engaging, for example, with those that are in urban and regional planning. For example, how we build our houses, where we build our houses, the areas, because it would appear that whether we reduce carbon emissions by a much more greater extent, climate change and increase of temperatures is inevitable. So whether we reach the 2-degree mark or the 1 degree as a result of perhaps maybe us reducing, but one thing is inevitable. It means that the things are going to change and the climate is going to change and is going to change adversely. So in our considering these questions, I think we need to now be engaging on a much more broader spectrum than just within a confined group of industry or with vested interest. Of course we do have vested interest because we are in this industry. But I think that we need a greater engagement with others to look at these things. And for governments, not only my home country of South Africa, but I've observed even within the Indian Ocean Rim, which India is a member state of, that I'm now the chair of the Business Forum, as we discuss these issues, I find that there's a lot about, say, we will address a balance in terms of energy mix through taxes, but those taxes go into the fiscus. They are not dedicated towards ensuring that we can have a research and development and start to bring out of from the lab, from pilot into commercial application of some of the technologies that have been found and discovered in fossil fuels based, for example, how to burn them cleaner. And governments, I think, by and large, they need to be encouraged to start to set aside the taxes that they levy on the fossil fuel industry, for those taxes to have dedicated use in doing research and development, because we, I think, all agree and acknowledge that over the next 40 to 50 years, fossil fuels are still going to be a factor. We might have increase in capacity, but does not in itself mean that the actual use of fossil fuels will decrease. So how do we ensure that there are resources? But also, I mean, in a group like this, how do we ensure that we incentivize the young, engineers and scientists? The world, I think, and governments are guilty of this, that so much more money is spent on finding ways and means of destroying life through the armaments industry than actually having resources put into scientists and engineers to finding ways of making life possible for all, because after all, inequality is the biggest enemy of the world. With those comments, I thank you.